sewing bassoon and oboe bags. Now I've got my oboe bag laid out on top of my bassoon bag just so you can see the difference in size. The bassoon bag obviously is a whole lot longer, but in many ways they're very similar. So the first thing you do for either one of them is to lay out the two halves, and you've got your 3 layers of fabric. You've got your inside layer, you have your middle, which is flannel, and then the outside layer, which in our case is school colors. And we've got the same for the bassoon bag. The red, the flannel, and our inside. And for both of them, we also have these extra little pieces of fabric. These are approximately 2.5 by 4 inches. We have 4 of them for the bassoon, and then another one that we cut in half to make a 2 by 2.5 pieces. And then we have 2 of those 2.5 by 4 inch pieces for the oboe. For the oboe, these pieces are used for elastic casing for the hole where the neck comes through. On the bassoon, the 2 small ones are used for the vocal hole, which is basically the neck on a bassoon if you're not familiar with it. And the others are used for the strap holes to put elastic casing through. And then we've also got the hand holes marked on there, and also on the bassoon. And then at the very top, you'll notice the front fabric extends about 1 inch above the inside 2 fabrics on both. And those will be folding over to make a finished edge. That's the opening where the instrument will be put in. Unlike for the clarinet or the saxophones, this is not going to have a drawstring in it. It's just going to be a finished edge, and then we will fold it over and snap it. So the first thing you're going to want to do is to pin all the way around the edges and pin around each of the hand holes. So make sure all the edges are lined up well, except this top edge, which extends 1 inch, and then pin them all the way around the edges to secure them. We're going to run a basting stitch around the edge of the bag to make sure that it doesn't shift while we're sewing the rest. And then you also want to pin around the hand holes. And I've done that both on my bassoon bag and on my oboe bag. One very important thing to check is to make sure the hand holes are in the correct position. On the oboe bag, along the top, you have this straight edge, and then it has a dip here. If those 2 dips are facing each other, on the right side, on this side, this hand hole should be higher than the one on the left, so that they'll be reversed when the bag is completed, because this is the inside of the bag. So make sure that is accurate before you start sewing. If it's not, then you just need to swap the inside 2 pieces and redraw the hand holes. But that's very important so that your finished bag will be correct. The same thing for the bassoon. The top of the bassoon is where the extra fabric is, and then part way down, so you see it's hard to show the bassoon because it's so big. The top of the bassoon is where the extra fabric is, and as you work your way down, if you have the vocal hole and the strap holes facing each other, okay, no, we'll do that over again. It's important also on the bassoon to check the position of the hand holes. The top of the bassoon is where the extra fabric is sticking up over the top, and then as you come down the center, you have the vocal holes facing each other, and then on the right you should see the hand holes, then the strap holes, and then on the left the other hand hole, and then you come down to the bottom and you see the strap holes on the bottom. If for some reason your handholds are not in the right position, then swap your two inside pieces of fabric and just transfer the markings. But that's very important so your finished bag ends up correct. Now you have both bags pinned, and now we want to make that casing at the top. It works the same on the Oboe bag, which has the smaller casing on the top, has the shorter one. But I'm going to show it on the Bassoon. The Bassoon has an extra step later. Okay, at that top casing where you've got the extra inch, fold your fabric over until the raw edge meets the raw edges of the inside fabric, and then you're going to fold it over again so that you have a clean edge on the top and on the inside, and then you're going to pin it there. This is where you're going to put the instrument into the bag, and so this just makes for a clean edge on top. Now that we've pinned down the top opening on our bag, we're ready to move on with the oboe. The bassoon has one more step, so hold on for that. But for your oboe, you're going to stitch all the way around just to secure the layers together onto each piece. You're also going to stitch around the outside of the handhole, about 1/4 of an inch away from this circle, and then you're also going to stitch around the outside of this neck hole, and then we will cut out both the hand hole and the neck hole. For the bassoon, you're going to do the same thing, but we have one more thing we need to pin on there before we do that. On the bassoon, we're going to take our two small pieces of fabric. It's one of these larger ones cut in half, one of the 2.5 by 4 inch cut in half, so it's a 2.5 by 2. For that, just fold your raw edges to the center and then fold it in half. So you end up with a nice little packet with no raw edges there. You are going to pin that raw edges together underneath the bocal hole. So it's going to be on the outside of your fabric with raw edges together. Line it up along that marking for the bocal hole. And remember, the bocal hole is the top of your two markings. The strap is the one that's between the two hands, and the bocal hole is above the hand holes. And so you're going to pin it there. When you stitch around the edges, you're going to stitch through that layer, and what that's going to do is that's going to act as a flag so that when we put it together, they'll know where the bocal hole is. Otherwise, it's very hard to find. So now in your bocal hole, you have those little flags pinned on there, you have your hand holes pinned, and you've got your fabric pinned all the way around, as well as the top finished edge. So again, you're going to stitch all the way around the bassoon, and yes, it's a very long way. You're going to stitch around each of the hand holes. You're going to stitch along those lines on the top strap hole as well as the one at the bottom. You're going to stitch through this flag or casing for the bocal, and you're going to stitch down your finished edge up here, and then we'll put it together. For both the bassoon and the oboe bag, the first step we want to do is sew all the way around the edge just to hold the 3 layers together. I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance and just a straight stitch. I'm going to start at the top on this folded edge and just catch the edge of it to hold it down, and then sew all the way down and all the way around. When we get to any of the strap holes or the neck hole on the oboe that are marked by these rectangles, you're going to sew along the lines that are traced out. The only place you will not do that is on the bassoon, the bocal hole, where we lined up this little flap of fabric on the outside. And for that, you're going to sew straight across and anchor this flap to the seam. So let's get started. 1/4 inch seam allowance, straight edge all the way around, including sewing, anchoring down and sewing right along the bottom of this finished edge at the top. So I've rounded the curve of the bottom of the bassoon bag, and I'm coming up on that bottom strap hole. So I'm going to sew right up to the line. I'm going to backstitch, turn, turn again, and then go back to my original seam allowance and continue on around. So you can see I've used contrasting thread here, so you can see I've outlined that. If you're not exactly on the lines, that's okay. Just try to stay as close to them as possible, and preferably to the outs, either right on or to the outside of the line, so that the hole will be big enough for them to put the strap in. I've done both my strap holes, and now I'm coming up on that bocal hole, which is the neck hole for the bassoon. And there's where we've put our flap of fabric. And for that, I am not going to outline the rectangle. I'm just going to go sew straight across and anchor that flap to the seam, or what will be the seam. And then I'm going to keep going. So there we have the flap sticking on the right side of the fabric. All the edges are finished, and it's sticking out. What that will serve to do is we don't put elastic around the bocal hole because it is so small and fragile. So we're just leaving a small hole, small opening in the seam for that, and this will serve as a flag to tell the student where the hole is to put the bocal in, so that they won't have to keep searching along the seam to try to find a tiny little opening. For the neck hole of the oboe, treat it the way we treated the strap holes on this, and do follow this along. So on the oboe neck hole, you'll do this. On the bassoon neck hole, or the bocal hole, you will just sew straight across it and anchor that flap down. As we come up to this top edge, the top opening, where we have folded our fabric down, our outside fabric down to make the finished edge, just sew along the bottom of it, like so. So about 1/4 of an inch from the bottom rather than the top, just to leave a nice, clean, pretty edge. This is the opening where they'll put the instrument in to the bag. For the bassoon, it goes all the way across the bag. For the oboe, it only goes part way across, and so for the oboe, you'll sew across the top of that, and then you'll continue sewing around the bag until you get to the neck hole. So on the side of our bassoon, we have the stitching going all the way around. Of course, you'll be using thread matching your fabric. I used the contrast so that you could see it more easily. Here's our flap for the bocal hole. It sticks down right on where that mark was. And then the stitching for the strap hole on the side, and then along the bottom, the stitching for the strap hole on the bottom. On the oboe, you see the stitching across here. This is the folded down clean edge on the top. And then it comes down here, and where the neck hole is, you see we've traced those lines and come on around. Now the other thing we need to do, which you can see on the oboe, is we need to stitch around the hand hole. And so we do just what we did there, but around the mark for the hand hole, we stitch about very close to it, a little inside a scant 1/4 inch or so, right around that marked circle where the handhole is. So here on the bassoon, I've got my handhole pinned, and I'm just going to start stitching around. I put the edge of my presser foot just along the inside of that, and that keeps me within between 1/4 and 1/8 of an inch of the hole. And we do this just to stabilize the hole when we cut it out. One quick tip on the bassoon: this bag is so long, it's sometimes very awkward to work with. So when you're sewing around the handhole, it helps to roll it up so that it'll fit through the neck of your machine. Roll at both ends, especially the top. Once we've sewn that top seam down, there's not much we're going to do with it for the moment, so you can leave it rolled up, and that gets some of the bulk of this fabric out of your way. And back stitch to anchor it. Move your pins, clip your threads. Apparently easier said than done. And there we have our handhole defined on the bassoon. So the next step we have is we are going to cut out the handholes and the strap holes. So we're going to cut just inside those lines we stitched. So we're going to cut it out just like this on the 2 strap holes on the bassoon and the neck hole on the oboe. And then on the hand hole on each side of both the oboe and the bassoon, you cut along and cut just inside your marked circle. So just inside your stitching line. Cut all the way around, and there's no need to save the circles. So now we've got the handhole cut. And so you'll do all those steps on both halves of the bag, and then we'll move on to our next step.